Hello and welcome to this Swift tutorial. In this video we will be creating our very own tic-tac-toe game. So if you like games and if you like gaming, then this is the perfect place for you. We will be creating our very own tic-tac-toe game with a 9-button layout, and how we do that is coming up in this video. We will be using SwiftUI and all that good stuff, so if that sounds good then keep on watching and we will take a look at it right now. Okay, so let's go ahead and open Xcode and create a new project. Make it an app, click next. I'm just going to call it TicTacToe App number 2 because this is actually the second time recording this. The first time there was an error. Interface, SwiftUI, language Swift, and then let's click on next and save it somewhere. So here we have our standard Hello World app. So I'm just going to go ahead and remove these two views, the image and the text. And then let's think about what we want to create. So obviously we want to create a tic-tac-toe app, but what are the elements that we're going to need? Well, first of all, I'm going to create a text up here just saying tic-tac-toe, which is going to be just a banner or the title of the app. Then we're going to have a grid with 9 buttons, so 3 by 3. So that user can place their icon and the whole tic-tac-toe game. And then we're going to have a button, or I'm at least going to put a button here that's going to reset the game or restart the game. So let's start by creating a title. I'm just going to make the text view here. I'm going to say tic-tac-toe like so, and this looks very nice, but I think I'm just going to add a few modifiers to it. So let's modify the font a bit. I'm going to go for the system font and specify a size. Let's try 40, and I'm also going to specify the weight of it. Let's try to make this heavy so that it really pops out. That's probably what I'm going to go for. I'm just going to check 45. Yeah, that's going to be my title. So this is the title, and now we can head on to the 9 buttons. And there are of course many ways to do this. You can place one button at a time, but I'm going to attempt to do something a bit more fancy here, which is to use a grid. So what we need to do when creating this grid is we need to specify how many columns we want and what type of columns we want. So the grid that we're going to use is a lazy V grid. And as you can see, it takes columns, so we have to specify how many columns and what type of columns we want. So I'm going to do that first by creating a constant here that I'm just going to abbreviate to call for a column and set that equal to an array. Repeat the item that I want 3 times. And the item that I want is a column, and I do that by saying grid item. Then I can specify what type of grid item I want, and I want one that's flexible. So it will adjust to the available space. So here we have an array of grid items that are flexible, repeated 3 times. Now we're going to pass that to our lazy V grid view. Lazy V grid columns is the one we just defined. So we're going to pass it that constant. And then here we go. So here we can see we have the 3 columns. I'm just going to copy paste it so that you can see it. 3 columns, just like we wanted. Now what we can do is we can of course just copy paste this 9 times just with a button. But instead I'm going to go for a for each loop that's going to loop 9 times. And each time it loops through, we want the iteration stored in I. So all this for each loop does is it runs 9 times, and each time it runs, we want to create a button. So let's do that with an action and a label. And the action we don't have right now, so we're going to specify that later, but that comes here. And the label, I'm just going to put X for now, but we're also going to change that afterwards, just to see how it looks design-wise. So now it looks kind of cool, but I think we're going to take it one step further and try to customize the buttons a bit more. So let's try to add a frame And the width and the height, I'm just going to set that to 100 perhaps, and a height of 100 as well, so we get a square button. And so that we see it a bit better, let's try to add a background. And I'm going to make the background blue. So here you can see our buttons are really start to take shape. The only thing is we can't see the text anymore, so let's change that by setting the foreground style to white. And I'm also going to change the font here, so I'm just going to copy paste what I wrote up here. Copy, paste, and I'm going to perhaps reduce, no, it actually looks pretty nice. So I think I'm just going to leave it at 45, and that's it. So here we have our button, and yeah, I mean, that's a nice first step. And as I said, I also wanted to add a button down here to reset the game. So I'm going to do that right now with an action and a label. Let's see. And the text here is going to be restart game. And as for the modifiers, I'm actually just going to be a bit lazy here and copy and paste this down here and just change a little bit around. So let's see, let's increase the width a bit. Oops, not so much. Let's go for 200 and let's set that one to 50. Let's reduce the font a little bit. Of course, you can do this however you want. And I'm also going to add a clip shape and set that to capsule like that. And I'm also going to add a little padding here to create some more space between the bottom of the game board and the button. So let's add one here to the bottom, and that should be it. So here we have our UI design. I think it turned out pretty okay, so I'm going to leave it like that. Of course, now we only need to build in some functionality so that the game works, but good start, I think. So let's go ahead and create some functions so that we make the game at least one step more functional. So of course we can write all the functions here, but I think I'm going to create a new file for that to keep it a bit orderly. And I'm going to make this a Swift file. Click next, and I'm going to call it game logic. You call it whatever you want and makes sense to you. I just find that's a fancy name. I'm going to place it here. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create some functions that we are going to use in our game. But before doing all that, I'm going to create an enum called player, which is going to keep track of the different players that are possible. So the first case is an X and the second case is O. So that's pretty simple, straightforward. Now the next thing I'm going to create is I'm going to create a class that I'm going to call Tic-Tac model, which is going to be conformed to observable object so that we can observe it later on. And then let's think about what we need here. So for our game to function properly, we're going to need a few functions. The first one is a function that is triggered each time a button is pressed, because we want to perform a certain action when our user presses the button. So we're going to have one function that I'm just going to call button pressed, which is going to be called each time a button is pressed. Then I want another function that's going to feed the button the type of text label to display. So this one is just going to be label of button. The function is going to return the label of the button, or in the case of our game, which player pressed which button. And then I'm also going to have a function for our reset game. We'll perhaps need some more function as we go along, but these will be the first three that we're going to focus on. So let's first create our function for our button tap. Func button tap, like so. And it's going to take an argument, which is the button that was tapped. So I'm just going to call it I for now, and this will make more sense as we go along, but I will explain it all afterwards when it makes more sense. What I'm going to do now is I'm also going to create two variables up here, which is going to be get the wrapper published so that it notifies each time the variable changes. I'm going to call this board, which is going to be our game board, which is going to be an array of the player, which is going to be an optional, and it's going to be an equal of array. And we're going to do the same fancy stuff here, which is going to be repeating nil 9 times. Now, why is that? So here we basically have our game board with an array of 9 nils, and each of these nils represent 1 brick in our game board. Let's just take a look at it. It's too slow, but we have a game board of 9 buttons, and each one keeps track of one of the buttons. And each time a user presses the button, the nil is going to be exchanged for the user that pressed the button, so either X or O. Then we're also going to need another variable, published var active player. Who is the active player of type player? And the first one I'm just going to set to X. So now we can go ahead and build out our button tap function. So first we're going to check if the button has already been tapped, because we don't want to double tap a button. So if board at I is equal to nil, which means no one has tapped that button yet, we're going to set the board at I equal to the active player who just pressed the button. That way we will know, oh, I have a misspelling here, active and active player. So now we will have registered a tap and who tapped the button, and now we can change the active player. Active player is equal to active player. If that is equal to X, then we're going to set the active player to O, and if it's already O, we're going to set it to X. So this way we register the button tap and which player pressed the button, and then we change the active player as the next player's turn. So that's it for that function. Let's customize the next one, which I'm going to call button label. It's also going to take an int, and this one is going to return the string, which is going to be our button label. And this is basically going to consist of a basic if statement. If let player is equal to board at I, which means it is nil and we can access that value. Then we're going to return player is equal to X, then return X, else return 0 or O. Big O. Going to explain this in a second. Else we return empty string. So here we're basically checking if there is a player who has pressed that button on our game board. If that player is equal to X, we're going to return X as our string or as our button label. In case it is not X, we're going to return O. And if it's neither, we're just going to return empty string. Then it's our reset game button, which is going to be very simple, as all we're going to do is we're going to reset all the variables. So board is equal to this. I'm just going to copy paste it. An array of 9 nils, and our active player is going to be set back to X. So let's try to implement these functions, which should go pretty swiftly. So let's head back to our content view, get some more space here. So instead of text, we're going to have the button label. Or first we're going to create an instance or reference to our class up here. Add observable object, and I'm going to call it Tic-Tac. I'm going to set that equal to our Tic-Tac model, like that. So now we will be able to access our nice class. Of course we will need a var. So down here for the text we're going to set it equal to Tic-Tac dot button label. and we're going to pass it the I, or the specific button that we have iterated to. And then up here, the button action is going to be tic-tac.button tap. Again, we're going to say which button is the one we're talking about, which is I. And then down here for the reset button, I'm going to pass it tic-tac.reset game. Okay, so now we have implemented all of our functions. Let's try this out. So I'm going to play an X, an O, an X, an O, an X, an O, an X, an O, an X, and reset the game. So brilliant. That works brilliantly, if I may say so myself. The only thing that doesn't work brilliantly is the game logic right now. As you can see, X has already won, but we're going to be able to continue placing or pressing buttons. So what we want to do now is we want to create functions that check if there has been a winner and then announces that winner. So that's going to be coming up in part 2. Hope to see you there, and take care.